What does it mean to truly make a choice? Could you right now decide to walk out the door, grab a glass of water, or just close your eyes and take a nap? It certainly feels like you can. It feels intuitive that we are the authors of our lives, capable of shaping our futures through free will. But what if science tells us otherwise? What if free will, that cornerstone of our identity, is an illusion? This is one of the most controversial and fascinating topics at the intersection of philosophy, neuroscience, and psychology. To understand free will through the lens of science, we must dive into what it means to have a choice, how our brains make decisions, and whether any of this really counts as free. Let's start with what science already knows about the brain and decision-making. Our brains are extraordinary prediction machines. Every thought, every action is the result of billions of neurons firing in intricate patterns governed by electrochemical processes. But what's fascinating is this. Scientists have found evidence suggesting that decisions may be made before we're even consciously aware of them. Recent experiments using technologies like EEG and fMRI have revealed that brain activity related to decision-making occurs milliseconds before we're consciously aware of our choices. These groundbreaking findings suggest that our brains might be preparing to make a choice before we even feel we are choosing. In the 1980s, neuroscientist Benjamin Libet conducted a groundbreaking experiment. He asked participants to flex their wrists whenever they felt the urge while measuring their brainwave activity using EEG. What he discovered shocked the scientific community. Libet found that brain activity related to decision-making, the readiness potential, occurred milliseconds before participants reported consciously deciding to move their wrists. Essentially, their brains were preparing to make the choice before they even felt they were choosing. More recent experiments using functional MRI have pushed this pre-conscious window even further. Studies suggest that brain activity can predict decisions several seconds before people are aware of their choice. For example, in one study, participants were asked to press a button with either their left or right hand while their brain activity was monitored. Scientists could predict which hand they'd choose well before the participant consciously made their decision. But here's the kicker. If a brain scan can predict your choices before you're even aware of them, can we really say those choices are free? What Libet's experiment and similar studies highlight is the possibility that our conscious will isn't the initiator of action. It's more like an interpreter, a storyteller piecing together what's happening after the fact. Our conscious awareness is like the narrator of a book, reading the pages of decisions already written by our subconscious processes. Still, this doesn't settle the debate. Some argue that just because subconscious brain activity precedes conscious decisions doesn't mean free will is entirely absent. After all, Libet himself suggested that consciousness might still have veto power. In other words, you might not initiate a thought consciously, but you could suppress or reframe it once you're aware of it. This vetoing process might be just enough wiggle room for something resembling free will. So is free will dead? Well, hold on. Science has more layers to reveal. Psychologists study decision-making from a slightly different angle. Through behavioral experiments, they've demonstrated how external factors like environment, habit, and context shape our choices. For example, consider the classic dilemma. You walk into a grocery store and see two brands of pasta right next to each other. Which do you pick? You might think you're choosing freely, but studies suggest this decision can be influenced by factors like the brightness of the label, the placement on the shelf, or even how recently you saw an advertisement for one of the brands. In fact, behavioral science has shown time and again that we aren't as rational or deliberate as we assume. Often, our choices are nudged by subconscious patterns, invisible cues, or emotional biases. Marketers exploit this constantly, turning subtle influences into powerful tools to guide your decisions. But does this mean your choices are entirely determined by external forces and neural impulses? Not everyone thinks so. In the philosophy of free will, there's a distinction between hard determinism and compatibilism. Hard determinists argue that every choice we make is the inevitable result of past events, like dominoes falling forever forward after the first push. If every neuron firing in your brain is the direct consequence of prior causes and conditioning, then your free will is effectively an illusion. Compatibilists, on the other hand, believe that even if events are determined by cause and effect, free will still exists in a meaningful sense. From this perspective, the freedom to choose comes not from randomness or defiance of physical laws, but from acting according to your desires, values, or personality. If you chose pasta over rice because you prefer it, aren't you still expressing your identity? Even if your brain is part of a chain of cause and effect, that chain can still reflect who you are. So, where does neuroscience fit into this? Well, some scientists argue that the brain's complexity makes the question of determinism impossibly hard to answer. The brain isn't just a simple sequence of dominoes. It's a vast network of interactions with built-in randomness and feedback loops. Decision-making involves countless influences: emotions, memory, environment, genetics, social interactions, even quantum mechanics at the microscopic scale. Is it governed strictly by rigid laws, or is there room for spontaneity and uncertainty? In fact, one of the great mysteries of neuroscience is how consciousness emerges, and whether it influences brain activity or is simply a byproduct of it. If consciousness has causal power, then there could still be a role for free will. But if it's merely the result of firing neurons, then we're left questioning whether any of our choices are truly ours. And this debate isn't just theoretical, it has profound implications. If free will doesn't exist, what happens to ideas like moral responsibility? Imagine someone commits a crime. If their actions are the result of unconscious neural processes and external factors beyond their control, can they be held fully accountable? This question is already shaping the legal system. Some courts have begun considering neuroscience evidence, like brain abnormalities or compulsions, as factors in sentencing or rehabilitation. Even beyond crime, this question of free will affects how we think about guilt, identity, and change. If our brains are programmed by a mix of genetics, environment, and biology, how much control do we really have over our habits or personal growth? Are self-improvement and the pursuit of goals fundamentally rooted in illusion? But don't despair. Whether or not we have absolute free will, humans are remarkable in their capacity for reflection. Awareness may not strike the first spark of action, but it does give us the power to shape our lives in meaningful ways. By understanding how we're influenced, whether by brain activity or external nudges, we can make better choices, or at least embrace the values that define us. Science doesn't close the book on free will. It opens new chapters. Yes, your subconscious may know more than your consciousness about what you'll do next. Yes, past experiences and subtle influences nudge you more than you realize. But with knowledge comes power. The power to recognize patterns, push back against bias, and create systems that enhance freedom, whatever that word ultimately means. What do you think? Is free will an illusion, a gift, or something in between? So here's the big question. If we are shaped by forces beyond our control, but still capable of reflection and intention, does that make us free in some meaningful sense? Maybe the question isn't whether free will exists, but how much responsibility we're willing to take for shaping our lives, despite its limits. What do you think? Is free will an illusion, a gift, or something in between?